Imagine this. After months locked inside Finland's Kilmakoski Correctional Center, the fate of Simon Ekpa, the man many call the voice of modern Biafra, now hangs on a single decision. News just broke that Simon might finally walk free. But here's the twist. Finland reportedly asked him to record a video denying he leads the Biafra movement. At first he rejected it. How do you tell a man who has dedicated his life to speaking for his people to renounce his identity? But then out of nowhere enters Dr. David Matsenganger, an African human rights heavyweight who can lead a major program in the UK just to take Simon's case. He's already shaken things up in Finland, meeting key trial officials and preparing lawsuits in 3 different countries to stop Nigeria's extradition push. And now the Finnish government faces a deadline that could change everything. Will Simon compromise his words to win his freedom? Or will he stand firm and risk losing his only chance to leave prison? This isn't just about one man. It's about decades of injustice, a people's cry for freedom, and a movement that refuses to die. Stay tuned, because what happens next could redefine the Biafran struggle forever. On the 21st of August, 2025, news broke that Simon Ekpa may soon be released from Kilmakoski Correctional Center in Finland after months in detention. Simon Ekpa brought in Dr. David Matsenganger, a prominent African human rights activist, to join his legal team and influence his case strategically.
Dr.
David Matsenganger cancelled a program in the UK to prioritize Simon Ekpa's case, meeting with Carla Gummaris, one of the key figures handling Simon Ekpa's trial in Finland. Finland reportedly asked Simon Ekpa to record a video statement denying leadership of the Biafra movement, clarifying he only served in an ambassadorial role. Initially, Simon Ekpa rejected this condition, but Dr. David Matsenganger advised him to carefully reframe the statement in a way that avoids future legal traps. The Finnish government acknowledged Simon Ekpa was once recognized as an ambassador of peace in Helsinki, strengthening claims that he was not a militant leader, but a peace envoy. The release deal reportedly has a deadline after which the offer would expire if Simon Ekpa doesn't agree. Meanwhile, Dr. David Matsenganger is preparing lawsuits in Finland, Nigeria, and East Africa, challenging Simon Ekpa's arrest, alleged inhumane treatment, and attempts to extradite him to Nigeria. These lawsuits aim to slow down both Finland's prosecution and Nigeria's extradition push, while also strengthening Simon Ekpa's defense internationally. Supporters believe Simon Ekpa is now in capable hands, with Dr. David Matsenganger's involvement seen as a turning point that could secure Simon Ekpa's release and stop any extradition moves. The story of Simon Ekpa's struggle in Finland and the possibility that he may finally walk out of Kilmakoski Correctional Center after months of detention is not just about one man. It is about a movement, about decades of pain, about the memory of a war that devastated millions of Igbo families, about a people who have lived through marginalization, discrimination, and calculated violence in Nigeria, and about the burning desire of Biafrans to be free. When news broke on the 21st of August, 2025 that Simon Ekpa's release date was finally in sight, the announcement carried a weight far greater than the fate of one individual. It carried the collective hope of millions who believe that Biafra, once declared in 1967 by General Chukwuemeka Odumwu-Ojukwu, is a dream that refuses to die. A seed that was watered by the blood of children and mothers during the Biafran War, and a call that has been reignited by Nnamdi Kanu and Simon Ekpa in this modern era of digital resistance. The first problem in the story lies in the very fact that Simon Ekpa was detained in Finland at all. He is a Finnish citizen, a lawyer and a political activist who has spoken openly about the plight of Biafrans in Nigeria. His only weapon has been his voice, his platform, and his influence. Yet he was arrested and caged like a criminal. Why did this happen? It happened because the Nigerian government, threatened by the truth he speaks, pressured foreign governments to silence him. It happened because whenever Biafran activists rise, they face persecution. Nnamdi Kanu was kidnapped in Kenya in 2021 and flown to Nigeria in clear violation of international law, and the world looked away. Simon Ekpa's detention in Finland followed the same pattern of trying to weaken the movement by targeting its leading figures. Simon's case was particularly complex because of the way Finland was caught between its own laws and the external pressure from Nigeria. For months, Finland held him in Kilmakovsky Correctional Center, painting him as someone whose activism was a threat. Yet at no time did Simon raise a gun, lead an army, or plant violence. His activism was built on speeches, broadcasts, and the mobilization of voices across the world. The Finnish government, perhaps out of fear of being accused of harboring a revolutionary, decided to test him with conditions for his release. They wanted him to record a video statement denying that he was the leader of the Biafra movement, saying instead that he only served in an ambassadorial role. This condition exposed the second problem, which is the hypocrisy of powerful states when dealing with oppressed people. On one hand, Finland had once celebrated Simon as an ambassador of peace in Helsinki, recognizing his role in encouraging dialogue and understanding. On the other hand, when Nigeria raised accusations, the same Finland appeared willing to compromise justice and push Simon to renounce the very identity that brought him that recognition. It was as if the Finnish government wanted to rewrite Simon's story to erase his role in the struggle and to brand him as someone less than what he truly represents to millions of Biafrans. Initially, Simon rejected the condition outright. To him, it was an insult, a demand that he betray the truth of his life and the memory of those who have died for Biafra. But then came Dr. David Matsenga, a respected African human rights activist known across the continent for his bluntness, his sharp legal mind, and his refusal to bow to intimidation. Dr. Matsenga immediately canceled a program he was scheduled to attend in the United Kingdom and flew straight to Finland to prioritize Simon's case. That in itself was a statement. It showed that Simon was not abandoned, that the Biafran movement had friends and allies who understood the stakes and were willing to fight for justice. Dr. Matsenga did not approach the matter as a cold lawyer. He understood that the battle was not only legal but also political and moral. He met with Carla Gomez, one of the key figures handling Simon's trial, and presented a strong argument. If Finland insisted on conditioning Simon's release on a humiliating denial, then it would be seen internationally as part of Nigeria's persecution machine. Instead, Dr. Matsenga advised Simon to carefully reframe any statement in a way that avoided legal traps, one that clarified his ambassadorial role without stripping him of his identity as a freedom advocate. It was a delicate balance to say enough to satisfy the Finnish authorities while leaving no loophole that Nigeria could use against him later. This was more than just courtroom strategy. It was about survival. Nigeria has a bloody history of silencing Igbo voices. Since the end of the Biafran War in 1970, the Nigerian government has continued to treat the southeast as a conquered territory. Roads remain in disrepair. Industries collapse without support. Appointments at the federal level bypass qualified Igbo citizens, and soldiers are deployed to villages with impunity. Each time the people protest, they are met with bullets. The massacre at Aba, the killings in Onitsha, the brutal raids in Oulu, and the recent violence in Imo and Ebonyi are all evidence of a state policy designed to crush dissent with force. Simon Ekpa's detention in Finland cannot be separated from this background of historical injustice. For decades, the Igbo people have been told to forgive and forget the genocide of the late 1960s. Yet the injustices never stopped. The hunger blockade that killed over 2 million Biafran children during the war was never acknowledged as a war crime. The massacre of civilians during military raids is never investigated. Even peaceful demonstrations by indigenous people of Biafra members have been met with gunfire. Against this backdrop, Simon's voice became a rallying point. He told the truth that others feared to say, that Biafra has a right to exist, that the Igbo people have a right to self-determination, and that oppression cannot last forever. The consequences of this struggle are heavy. Simon's detention has slowed certain operations of the Biafran global movement, leaving many followers demoralized. Families of detained activists in Nigeria feel abandoned, thinking their leaders are always targeted abroad. Yet his courage has also inspired others to rise. In Finland, his imprisonment sparked protests and petitions. In the United States, the Biafran diaspora organized rallies demanding his release. Across Africa, human rights organizations began to pay attention to what was happening, connecting Simon's ordeal to the wider pattern of silencing African activists who speak inconvenient truths. The possible solutions lie in international law, solidarity, and relentless advocacy. Dr. Matsenganger's lawsuits in Finland, Nigeria, and East Africa are strategic moves to slow down both the Finnish prosecution and Nigeria's push for extradition. These cases are not just about Simon's personal freedom. They are about setting a precedent that Biafran activists cannot be hunted down and silenced with impunity. If successful, they will send a message that the global community is watching, that human rights cannot be trampled for political convenience. The road to a solution is still long, but the progress made by involving Dr. Matsenga has brought new energy to the movement. Supporters believe that Simon is now in capable hands. The combination of legal expertise, political influence, and media power that Dr. Matsenga brings to the table could be the turning point that secures Simon's release and blocks any extradition to Nigeria. The Finnish government, faced with international scrutiny, may be forced to choose justice over political deals. At the heart of this story, however, is not just the fate of Simon Ekpa. It is the fate of Biafra. Simon's freedom is tied to the freedom of his people. His detention reflects the fear that the Nigerian state has of any Igbo leader who dares to speak boldly. His release would represent a victory not only for him but for every Biafran who has carried the memory of war, the weight of marginalization, and the dream of liberation. It would prove that truth, even when caged, cannot be broken. When we look closely at Simon Ekpa's months of detention in Finland, we see not just the steel bars and the walls of Kilmakovsky Correctional Center, but the psychological war waged against him. A man who had become the prime minister of Biafra in exile was suddenly forced into isolation, told to renounce the very identity that gave meaning to his life. For weeks and months, reports filtered out that Simon was denied full access to his family, that his communication with his legal team was tightly controlled, and that he was portrayed as a security risk when in truth his only crime was speaking for the oppressed. This is not unusual for a Biafran leader. Nami Kanu himself was treated with the same contempt when he was kidnapped in Kenya and forced back into Nigeria in 2021 despite holding British citizenship. It is a pattern of intimidation that follows any Igbo who dares to rise against injustice. The provocation behind Simon's ordeal is clear. Nigeria fears voices it cannot silence within its borders. Inside Nigeria, it has the military, the police, and security forces that can raid communities, arrest activists, and scatter protesters. But when those voices rise outside Nigeria, especially in Europe and America, Nigeria loses control. Simon's broadcasts from Finland reached millions, inspiring a generation of Biafrans to see freedom not as a dream of the past, but as a fight of the present. His words disrupted Nigeria's propaganda, challenged the lies of unity, and reminded the world that Biafra never truly died. That is why he was targeted. His voice had become more powerful than bullets. The consequences of this provocation cannot be underestimated. Every arrest of a Biafran leader adds fuel to the fire. When Nami Kananu was abducted, the movement grew stronger instead of weaker. When Simon was locked up, the Biafran diaspora across Europe, America, and Africa grew louder. It is the nature of oppression. It often produces the very resistance it seeks to destroy. Nigeria's leaders failed to understand that when they try to bury voices like Simon's, they plant them instead. But while the consequences strengthened the movement, the personal pain was real. Simon's family suffered. His supporters in Finland felt betrayed by a government they once thought respected human rights. Many asked how Finland, a country that prides itself on democracy and freedom, could turn around and detain a man for speaking about self-determination. These questions still hang in the air. They show that the world is beginning to see the contradictions of Western democracies who preach freedom but bend when pressured by governments like Nigeria. The involvement of Dr. David Matsenganger was therefore a divine intervention for many Biafrans. Known for his fearlessness, Dr. Matsenganger did not just take the case as a lawyer, but as a Pan-African voice against injustice. He told the Finnish authorities to their face that this case was not just about Simon Ekpa. It was about whether Finland would stand for human rights or bend to Nigeria's dictatorship. He reminded them that the same Simon they were detaining was once honored as an ambassador of peace in Helsinki. How could a man recognized for peace be painted as a violent militant simply because Nigeria said so? Dr. Matsenga's strategy of preparing lawsuits in Finland, Nigeria, and East Africa is crucial because it internationalizes the struggle. If Finland insists on injustice, the case will be exposed in African courts, where the hypocrisy of the West can be laid bare. If Nigeria dares to push extradition, the world will see it as a continuation of the unlawful kidnapping of Nnamdi Kanu. This web of lawsuits is not just legal maneuvering. It is political resistance. It buys time. It frustrates the oppressors. And it keeps Simon's case in global headlines. Supporters believe this is the turning point. For months, Simon's detention felt like a deadlock with no way out. But with Matsenga's involvement, with media attention rising, and with Finland realizing that the case could stain its image, the path to release has become visible. The condition placed before Simon to record a video statement was once seen as a trap. Now, with careful legal advice, it may become an opportunity. By reframing his role as an ambassador for peace, Simon can satisfy Finland without betraying Biafra. It is a fine line, but one that may secure his release. Yet, even if Simon walks free, the larger issue remains unresolved. The injustice against Biafrans continues. This is where history must be told because, without understanding the past, the present situation makes no sense. In 1967, after pogroms in northern Nigeria killed tens of thousands of Igbos, Biafra declared independence. The Nigerian government responded with war aided by Britain, Russia, and Egypt. For 3 years from 1967 to 1970, the world watched as over 2 million Biafran children and civilians starved to death because of a deliberate food blockade. Pictures of starving children with swollen bellies and thin arms shocked the conscience of humanity. Yet the world did nothing. The war ended in 1970, but for Biafrans, the suffering never ended. Since then, Nigeria has continued policies of exclusion. Federal roads in the east are left to rot. The oil in the south is exploited, but the people of the region live in poverty. Universities and industries in Igbo receive no federal attention. Appointments at the highest levels of government are denied to Igbos. Every attempt at protest is met with soldiers. When people in ABA gathered in prayer, they were shot. When youths in Onitsha marched peacefully, they were killed. When IPOB members in Ulu spoke against injustice, they were massacred. These atrocities are not hidden. They are documented by human rights groups. Yet no one is held accountable. It is against this backdrop that Simon's voice rose, and it is why his freedom matters so much. His release would not only be a personal victory, but a symbolic rejection of Nigeria's intimidation. It would tell Biafrans that their struggle is not in vain, that the world is listening, and that freedom is still possible. His imprisonment, on the other hand, serves Nigeria's narrative of silencing dissent. That is why so much is at stake in Finland's decision. How far are we from the final solution? The answer is complicated. In terms of Simon's immediate freedom, we may be days or weeks away. Negotiations are ongoing, and the release deal reportedly has a deadline. If Simon agrees to the carefully framed statement, he could walk out soon. But in terms of the Biafran question, the solution is still distant. Independence requires international recognition, diplomatic alliances, and a global shift in support. That is why the involvement of people like Dr. Matsenga is so crucial. It connects the Biafran struggle to larger African and global networks of advocacy. For now, what Biafrans have is hope. A hope that Finland will do the right thing. Hope that Simon's sacrifice will not be in vain. Hope that Nnamdi Kanu, still imprisoned in Nigeria, will one day walk free. Hope that the blood of millions who died in the war will not be forgotten. And above all, hope that the long dream of Biafra will finally become reality. Simon Ekpa's imprisonment inside Kilmakoski Correctional Center was not just about legal arguments or diplomatic maneuvering. It was also about the daily reality of a man who had to endure confinement for his beliefs. Inside the prison, Simon's routine was strictly regulated. And though Finland prides itself on humane prisons compared to other countries, for a man like Simon, it was still a cage. He was cut off from his people, from the freedom of speech that had always defined his activism, and from the ability to respond in real time to Nigerian propaganda against him. To Biafrans around the world, every day he spent in detention felt like another attempt to silence the struggle. His supporters often asked themselves what exactly justified his detention. Was it a crime to speak for self-determination? Was it illegal to broadcast messages of hope to an oppressed people? If Simon had been advocating for Ukraine's independence or for the rights of Palestinians or for Tibet, would he have been treated the same way? Or was it because he was an African, because he was Igbo, because his cause was Biafra, that the international community thought it could look away? These questions fueled protests in Helsinki, London, Washington, and even Johannesburg. They reminded people that human rights are often applied selectively, depending on whose interests are at stake. Simon Eker's imprisonment inside Kilmacoski Correctional Center was not just about legal